Accessibility is a right, not a privilege. Every individual, regardless of physical, cognitive, or sensory abilities, deserves access to spaces, services, information, and opportunities. Breaking Barriers for Inclusive Manitoba connects with real people to hear about their lives, challenges, and solutions to creating a more inclusive Manitoba for all.
I am Talitha Kaethler. She, her are my pronouns. I live in the West End of Winnipeg. I've lived in Winnipeg since I became an adult. I'm not originally from here, but I have found Winnipeg to be a home. I work at Booth in a couple of roles. One of them is academic learning support for students, and the other is in accessibility supports for students.
That's going to be the topic today, accessibility. So when we're looking at those different supports for students, what are some of those programs that are available or initiatives that are available here at Booth University College?
I would say the first and maybe foundational thing is giving access to resources to students through something called accessibility services. So what that means is any student who has an interest, who suspects that, or has a diagnosis, suspects that they may be living with a disability or require that kind of support, are then able to meet with me or with my colleagues and to speak about the ways in which we can remove systemic barriers, institutional barriers, so that they are able to get access to their education. So we are talking specifically about their experiences as students, whether that is on campus or in classes, because Booth offers virtual classes as well. And so whether it's a virtual school experience, whether it has to do with exams or assignments, or attending physical classes in this physical space. So that is foundational, is the work of accessibility services. There also is a week that the student services team celebrates every year to raise awareness among the for the campus, called Disability Dialogue Week. And that's an annual initiative that is coordinated and organized by a group of students, staff, and faculty who are interested and passionate about it. Academic learning supports, which is the other half of my job, is actually one of the strengths and one of the things that we offer to all students, regardless of their abilities. But I do see it as being a part of an accessibility initiative because it is giving students access to the kinds of resources. And sometimes it just has to do with knowing what the rules are of being a student in a university.
Well, that's good to hear. Like you have that collaborative aspect that's going on.
And then there's also an accessibility working group, which is a voluntary. It's a group again of students, staff, and faculty who review and write policy and procedures in keeping with the Accessibility for Manitobans Act. And so that's another piece of the accessibility work that happens at Booth College.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, it's an important aspect to be thinking about in terms of accessibility. So when we're looking at the mandate that helps curate and create all these different initiatives and programs, what do you consider when it comes to different types of ability levels, different types of disabilities? Because when someone thinks of a disability, sometimes they might think of those physical disabilities that come in there, whether that's wheelchair access or visual impairment, but it goes way beyond that. So when you're considering all these different areas, what conversations are going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the word disability in and of itself, I think, is problematic in that it implies deficiency. And I think that we are all being challenged to reconsider how we perceive one another and what constitutes it. It's right alongside kind of what we define as normal. Even the word normal, quite problematic, because again, to challenge our thinking through the language that we use, what it comes down to, I think, is not about the label of disability or the label of normal, to use a binary that's very problematic, right? I think instead we are challenged to think about individuals and the different ways that our bodies and minds are put together. And so that can include the way our physical bodies function. It can include the way our brains function. It can include things that are genetic parts of who we are, like mental illness, right? And to see, it could also include incidents in our lives where for a period of time, we are unable to do things that we are usually able to do. So consider, for instance, a car accident where someone then sustains a physical injury or a brain injury, right? That then for a period of time, hopefully only, this person is unable to do some of the things as they would have been able to previously do, right? So thinking not in terms of who is disabled and who is not disabled, but instead thinking about all of us and how each of us are put together differently, and how instead of labeling humans, we look at structures and systems that are made to privilege certain kinds of bodies and brains and emotions over others. And what can we do to remove the barriers in the systems so that everyone has equal access? I mean, at some point in our lives, all of us are going to experience what I'm going to call in quotation marks disability at some point. It's not if, it's when. And there's a variety of ways that that expresses itself.
Well, like you mentioned, the car accident, like there's so many different things that can happen in life. My grandfather's a great example. You know, he's been losing his vision for a number of years, and for himself, you know, that's been a challenge. You know, he lost a little bit of his independence because he's had to shift his perspective of life a little bit.
That's a wonderful example. I think at various stages in our lives, everybody goes through experiences where things are not accessible. I think infancy is another example. Many things are not accessible to infants. Or if you are a caregiver for an infant, then certain physical spaces might not be accessible to you because you have to carry the infant in your arms, or you have to use a stroller. Like, those are some very tangible examples, again, not of universal experience. Infancy is a universal experience. Parenthood is not. But examples of the ways in which access and lack of access are integrated kind of into the fiber of what it means to be human.
I think that's an important part of that conversation, that distinguish and putting the humanity back in the conversation, to not just define people by, oh, you can't do this while someone can. It's about, you know, everyone's lived experiences and making those opportunities available for everyone.
Exactly.
You know, you've mentioned it a little bit, those different kind of groups and things to bring awareness, to have those conversations. But, you know, when you're developing these different plans and programs, are you in conversation with individuals, advocates, organizations to better develop your accessibility programs, in addition to ensuring that the facility itself is accessible?
Yes, I think that's extremely important. I think looking at best practices, and also not even beyond best practices, getting a sense of what others are doing. So is just an important part of this humble walk, that is learning how to do these things better. I'm very proud of how Booth is working right now, but we are by no means perfect. And I think there's always room to grow. And I think, one of the ways that this happens is the accessibility services staff is in conversation, for instance, with other post-secondary institutions and staff members, faculty members who are also involved in accessibility work at universities and colleges around Manitoba, to have conversations about how do things happen at your institution, to hold each other to account, to challenge one another, and to take part like in organizing professional development for ourselves, so that we ourselves are able to grow in our abilities to point students and also colleagues like staff and faculty to like the resources that are available. So that's one of the examples that I can think of. I think forming partnerships with organizations can happen in many ways. And this is a way that I'd like to see Booth growing more. But I think one of the ways that we are already doing beautiful work is that the Faculty of Social Work at Booth University College has a very robust relationship with social organizations, nonprofit organizations, social supports in Winnipeg and also in the province of Manitoba. And I think connections to these organizations then can allow us to share resources. So when a colleague of mine or when a student approaches me and asks, explains a situation, I am able to then offer to them some of the free things that are available to them here within the city. Mm-hmm. So sharing resources is one example. I think that building partnerships, there's many things that can be done here. But recently a student initiated building a connection between Booth University College and Thrive Support Circle, which provides a number of resources, including mental health resources to students, but also to members of downtown Winnipeg. These individuals, they came to Booth, they put on a presentation, we recorded it, we sent it to them, and we have it available to our students as well, so that they're able to see this is another organization, another place where you can get support.
That's an exciting aspect for that example, it's out into the community as well. It's not just like, oh, these services are here, no one else can have them. And you touched on a lot of those aspects of best practices, connecting with different organizations, individuals, other post-secondary institutes about, what are the best ways to accommodate people and open up those spaces. And another aspect you touched on, the mental health aspect. A lot of people might not think of that as an accessibility issue, but for some individuals, those systemic barriers that can come from maybe they have had a traumatic experience and things might be a little bit more difficult to go through. Maybe someone is going through a very challenging part in their life, and knowing there are services and things can make it easier for them to continue and pursue education or other aspects of life and not just be like, well, I have to deal with this now, so I have to put my whole life on pause.
Yeah. And I think realizing that is available. I had a personal experience where, and again, this is one of those instances where, I've required accessibility services at various points in my life and access. But when I was a university student, I was commuting to an exam and my car ran out of gas when I was about a 15-minute drive away from the university. I did what I needed to do, walked to a gas station, got a jerry can, got a ride back. Anyways, flustered, arrived 45 minutes late to my exam, walked in, and my instructor looked at me and she said, "You go home and take care of yourself. We'll find another time." And what I experienced in that moment was her, and I'm not saying that this situation is the same as living with a disability, right? This is a micro instance where someone saw that my personal circumstance in that moment was going to be a barrier towards me being able to accurately represent what I know. Writing an exam at a certain time of day was the barrier, actually. Let me rephrase that. So she was flexible and I wrote it at a different time so that I was able to accurately represent my knowledge. And I think that experience, the relief, I was humbled. Of course, I was emotional, frantic in that moment. The relief of recognizing that someone else was seeing that exam on this day at this time is going to be problematic when it comes to Talitha accurately representing what she knows and removing the barrier and rescheduling it so that I could write it at a different time.
Well, that flexibility, that empathy showcases how systemic barriers and removal of those, it benefits everyone, right? It creates opportunities, flexibility. So in cases of situations like your own, people can be accommodating then. So it's important to have those conversations. And, coming back to that, how often do you review your programming a facility to better accommodate students and staff at Booth University College? Because you don't want a place, as you're mentioning before, where they say, yeah, we're all good. We're done. We don't need to worry about that anymore. We've solved all the issues.
My background is in education, and I spend a lot of time thinking about fixed brain and flexible brain, which are our education terms, right? Fixed brain being an attitude of an individual or a group of people or an institution where you take a fatalistic approach. You say, this is how it is. Or you shift blame and you say, oh, it's not my fault, it's their fault. And then the flexible brain, which is the moldable, shapeable, growable brain that recognizes that there is room for growth, there's room for responsibility, for agency. And as somebody who has a lot of experience with both being fixed-brained and flexible-brained myself, I definitely see the value in holding a workplace, which is an institution in this case, to account to ensure that we are not fixed brain about this, that we cultivate a flexible brain. So I mentioned one example of that already, which is the Accessibility Working Group, who does review policy and drafts procedure and is watching for what the expectations are from the province of Manitoba so that we are meeting those expectations and hopefully exceeding those expectations as well. There is required training for all new staff and faculty, and that is a way of reviewing, because every time someone new comes and joins this institution, giving them a chance to be onboarded and to think about what it means for a space that prioritizes accessibility, not only for themselves and their colleagues, but also for students. And I'm in constant conversation with faculty, with instructors. We have formal meetings, we have informal meetings. So many of my colleagues who are on faculty are proactive. They'll reach out to me. They'll say, Talitha, what's your opinion on this situation? And we'll discuss it. And then we'll refer to another source. And so I feel that there is a sharpening that happens in a very integrated way with many of the instructors specifically, that is a way of reviewing, right? Reviewing what are the nuts and bolts. What is the concrete way that this plays out?
You gave an example before about a student, approaching and wanting to talk about a program within the community, giving a presentation. Are there other examples of students coming up to you or other staff here at Booth University College to talk about, hey, here's something I'm thinking about that could make things more accessible. Oh, I have an idea of X or Y.
This happens all the time. I'm right in the middle of it. So currently, we're anticipating convocation, which is happening on Sunday, April 27. We are currently processing what it means to provide accommodations for convocation. Currently, there are plans to review the accessibility for this building. So within the last year, Booth has moved actually to a location at 290 Vaughan Street, but then there is an additional space being used at 123 Main Street. And so there had been a substantial review done of our other building, our former building at Webb Place. But now that we've moved, this process must start again. So conducting a review of the space. I am in the midst of coordinating final exam accommodations for students. So there's a student writing today. A student wrote last night. And trying to make sure that we remove barriers so that there is an accurate representation of knowledge. During this time, like this final week of the semester, I've been meeting with students online, chatting over the phone, meeting in person over email. So yes, this is very much current.
You're in the thick of it.
I'm in the thick of it. We are in the thick of it. Yeah.
So for people who are listening to this conversation, I think one of the things that might come to mind is that flexible mindset that you're talking about, of looking at situations or barriers as opportunities to overcome and open them to individuals. When we're looking through this whole conversation about accessibility, when we're looking at developing programming and spaceables that are accessible to both students and staff here at Booth University College, why is that an important mandate for this institution?
That is a great question. And I will read the mission statement of the college. So the mission statement of Booth College says, the University College educates students to understand the complexities of our world, to develop the knowledge and skills necessary to be active contributors to society, and to know how Christian faith compels them to bring hope, social justice, and mercy into our world. So if I look at that statement, I think understanding the complexities of our world includes not painting every single human with the same brush, right? It's noticing nuances, developing knowledge and skills necessary to be active contributors. I think about agency and empowerment for all individuals, regardless of how their brains or their bodies or their hearts are put together. And then when it comes to hope and social justice and mercy, I'm reminded of the fact that the Salvation Army is known for being compassionate and caring for its most vulnerable. This is a legacy of the Salvation Army, both in Winnipeg, but also around the world. And I think the idea that accessibility is an act of social justice, to me, is a very easy thing to connect, right? So in a society that privileges access to some, but not all, accessibility is at the heart of what Booth feels compelled towards. There's this desire that all students would do well. And I think that this is challenging in so many different contexts, but one of the advantages that Booth College has is that it's a small institution. And I think being a small institution, there is flexibility that comes along with that. It's an advantage. So that my hope is, of course, that this is how everyone who spends time in this building, who is a student, but also who's visiting or working here, experiences that flexibility and that student-centric approach.
Breaking Barriers for Inclusive Manitoba is focused on raising awareness and taking action to prevent and remove accessibility barriers. This initiative is proudly in partnership with Accessibility Manitoba, working together for a more inclusive future.